Welcome back, everyone, to the LDB Crime Podcast. Today we're going on a deep dive into a case that's a real head-scratcher, the I-70 Strangler.
Yeah, it really is a puzzle. I mean, you've got all these murders that seem connected, but then there are these gaps in the story. It's almost like we're missing pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, like you've got this suspect who looks guilty, but can you really prove it? It's tough. So the I-70 Strangler, this guy was active between 1980 and 1991, mainly around Indianapolis.
Mm,
And he had this really specific way of killing his victims, strangulation,
that's right, strangulation. And often he dumped their bodies near I-70.
hence the name, the I-70 Strangler.
Uh,
It's really disturbing that he would often lure his victims from gay bars.
yeah, it's a chilling detail. I mean, it really suggests he was a predator who knew how to, blend in, gain people's trust.
It's a terrifying thought, that kind of calculation.
Mm.
Especially back in the early 80s, the LGBTQ plus community was already facing so much discrimination.
Absolutely. And to be targeted in a place that should have been a safe haven, I mean, that just makes it even more tragic.
It really does. And it makes you wonder if maybe some victims were hesitant to talk to the police because they were afraid of, more prejudice.
It's a possibility for sure. The social climate back then definitely could have impacted the investigation.
It's heartbreaking to think about. Let's talk about some of the victims, because each of their stories gives us a little more insight into the kind of killer we're dealing with here. There was Michael Petrie. He was only 15 years old.
15.
Yeah, he was the first victim they found back in 1980. And sadly, his case really sets the stage for a lot of the ones that come after. Then there's Delvoyd Lee Baker, just 14, last seen getting into a blue van.
Yeah, and whenever investigators see something like that, a specific detail that pops up, they start looking for a potential pattern. That blue van, if it was actually involved, could be a link between victims.
Right, but then again, a blue van, that's not exactly uncommon. They would need a lot more to go on than that.
Exactly. Maybe a witness who remembers a license plate, a specific dent, anything to make that van stand out and place it at more than one crime scene. Those details are crucial.
It's tough. You see how hard these investigations can be. And then there's Michael Andrew O'Reilly. He was last seen leaving a nightclub with a stranger.
Again.
Again, it shows the killer was able to charm his way into these situations.
Right. That ability to manipulate is a key part of his profile. And then you have Otto Gary Becker.
Yeah, Otto Gary Becker.
Witnesses actually saw him being held down in a car.
Wow. So this wasn't some quiet, behind closed doors kind of crime. This guy was bold.
It does seem like he got bolder as time went on, almost like he felt like he could get away with anything. That's something you see a lot with serial killers.
Escalation, yeah. Now, with so many victims, what were the authorities doing about this? Did they ever form a task force? I mean, this feels like a huge investigation.
They did, yeah. They formed a task force, and even the FBI got involved.
Wow. That's when you know it's serious.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And get this, based on the victims and the different ways they were killed, the FBI started to think that there might be two people involved.
Wait, two? You mean two killers? How did they come to that conclusion?
Well, they were using criminal profiling.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's where they analyze everything, like the crime scene, the victims' backgrounds, how they were killed, you name it. And they're looking for inconsistencies, things that might suggest different personalities.
Oh, I see. So maybe one crime was planned out while another one was more impulsive, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Like some victims might have been stalked while others were chosen randomly. These differences, they can be clues.
So they actually had two separate profiles in mind. That's wild. What did these profiles look like?
Okay, so their first profile was a blue-collar worker. Maybe someone struggling with, their own sexuality and lashing out because of it.
Wow, that's dark.
It is. And then their second profile was completely different. They thought it could be an older guy, successful, maybe even a respected member of the community, but hiding this secret life.
Okay, so I've got the outwardly homophobic blue-collar worker versus the seemingly upstanding citizen with a dark side. Two very different profiles, but both terrifying in their own way. Did they have any suspects that matched these profiles?
There were a few early leads, but none that really stuck. There was this guy, Duncan Patterson. He was actually later convicted for molesting kids.
Oh, wow.
But they ruled him out for the I-70 Strangler case. Then there was another guy, August Gus Cato. They questioned him, but they didn't have enough evidence to hold him. But there was one suspect who, at first, seemed really promising.
Who was that?
His name was Larry Eiler.
Eiler. Wasn't he already a serial killer?
You got it. He was actually already on death row for a bunch of murders that had some similarities to the I-70 Strangler's crimes, like his victims were often young men, and he tended to dump bodies near highways.
So it must have felt like a major breakthrough when they found him.
It did, for sure. But when you look closer, his MO didn't quite line up perfectly.
Oh, interesting. What didn't add up?
Well, Eiler actually confessed to a ton of murders when he was on death row, probably hoping for some kind of deal. But none of the murders he confessed to matched the I-70 Strangler's victims. So even though it seemed promising at first, they eventually ruled Eiler out too.
So a bunch of brutal murders, this big investigation, and it seems like they hit a wall. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack.
You could say that again. And then years later, a new suspect pops up.
Years later. Wow. Who is this new guy?
His name was Herb Baumeister.
Herb Baumeister. Wasn't he some big shot businessman?
Yeah, he owned a bunch of thrift stores, had
Yeah.
a family, big house, the whole 9 yards. But there was a dark side to him, a really dark side.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What connected him to the I-70 Strangler case? Did he match one of the profiles or something?
Not really. A witness came forward saying they'd seen a picture of Baumeister with Michael Riley, one of the victims, the night he vanished.
Wait, the Michael Riley. But that was years ago.
Yeah, years after Riley disappeared. But it put Baumeister right in the crosshairs of the investigation.
It's amazing how one little thing can change the whole game, even after all that time. I wonder what made that witness finally come forward.
Could be a guilty conscience. Or maybe they just felt safer talking now. Whatever the reason, it really put the spotlight on Baumeister. And things got a whole lot creepier when investigators started digging into his past.
Okay, so what'd they find? How creepy are we talking here?
Well, for starters, they suspected him in the deaths of at least 7 other guys, and guess where they found their bodies?
I don't know, tell me. Where?
Buried on his property.
Whoa. Are we talking about Fox Hollow Farm? That place gives me the creeps.
Let's a one. Baumeister bought it in 1991. And it seems like after that, he changed his ways, started using the farm as his own personal graveyard.
Okay, now that is seriously messed up. So we've got this guy linked to one of the I-70 Strangler victims, suspected in a bunch of other murders, and with a property straight out of a horror movie. It's a slam dunk, right?
You'd think so, but here's the thing. They couldn't find any physical evidence directly linking him to the I-70 Strangler victims.
So while they thought he was behind those other murders, his connection to the I-70 Strangler was still a question mark.
Exactly. And that lack of hard evidence caused a lot of controversy.
I bet. People must have had some strong opinions about that.
Oh, yeah. Some folks thought that the police were just trying to pin it on Baumeister to quickly close the case. There was an election coming up. They needed to look good.
So Baumeister was the easy target.
That's one way to look at it. There's this journalist, Ted Fleischaker. He's done a lot of research on the I-70 Strangler case. He thinks Baumeister was a scapegoat, thinks the real killer is still out there.
Wow. That's a pretty serious claim. Does he have anything to back that up?
Well, he points to the lack of physical evidence we talked about. And there were also some inconsistencies in the MO between the I-70 murders and the bodies found on Baumeister's property. Plus, there were rumors of police misconduct, maybe some evidence was messed with or even planted to make Baumeister look guilty.
If that's true, then that really throws the whole investigation into question. But the thing is, Baumeister himself can't tell us anything. He took his own life in 1996 before they could charge him for any of the I-70 Strangler murders.
Yeah, and that just adds another layer of mystery to the whole thing. Was his suicide a confession? Or was he afraid of being convicted for something he didn't do? We'll never really know.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces. So where does that leave us? Was Herb Baumeister the I-70 Strangler? Or did the real killer slip through the cracks?
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? We've seen the way he killed, met the victims, talked about all the twists and turns of the investigation.
And yet, the I-70 Strangler case remains a big question mark.
There just isn't that definite proof. And all the questions around Baumeister, they keep people talking, even today.
It's a case that's stuck with people, investigators, families of the victims, everyone. It shows you that sometimes, even with what seems like a lot of evidence, the truth can be really hard to find.
It really is a reminder that justice isn't always served. And it's chilling to think that someone who could do those things might still be out there.
It is a scary thought. The I-70 Strangler case really shows you that evil can be hiding anywhere. And even with all the technology and forensic science we have today, some mysteries might never be solved. It makes you think twice about who you can trust, that's for sure. The I-70 Strangler case tells us that the world can be a dangerous place. But it also shows how strong people can be, how much they want justice, even when things are really dark. So where do we go from here? I mean, with so many unanswered questions, what do we take away from all this? We've gone down this rabbit hole, but we still don't have all the answers.
I think it just shows how important it is to keep these cold cases in the public eye. I mean, who knows? Maybe new DNA technology, better investigative tools could give us a fresh look at the I-70 Strangler case.
Yeah. Give some closure to those families who've been waiting so long.
Exactly. There's always that hope that something new will come up, even after all these years. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finally learn the truth about the I-70 Strangler. But, for now, it's a reminder that there are people out there who get away with terrible things, that the fight for justice can be a long one.
It's really a reminder that these cases aren't just about statistics or files. They're about real people whose lives were cut short, families who are still hurting.
That's right, especially in this case where the community was already dealing with so much discrimination.
Yeah. You can't measure the impact these crimes had. It makes you realize that solving a case isn't just about catching the killer. It's about helping everyone heal, finding some kind of justice for those affected.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a reminder to be careful to pay attention to your surroundings. I mean, think about it. These crimes often happened in plain sight.
Yeah. Places where people should feel safe.
Exactly. So, it just goes to show that these predators can be anywhere. And it's so important to trust your gut.
You never know who you're dealing with. It's a scary thought that evil can hide behind a friendly face, blend right in. That's what makes cases like this so unsettling.
It does make you question your sense of safety. Who can you really trust? I think the I-70 Strangler case reminds us that the world can be a dangerous place, but it also shows us how resilient we are, how much we want justice, even when it seems impossible.
That's a good point. Well, that was a deep dive into a truly disturbing and confusing case. The I-70 Strangler is a real mystery.
A real mystery.
It makes you think about how complicated criminal investigations can be and how long the effects of these crimes can last. We may never have all the answers, but by keeping these cases alive, by listening to different perspectives and remembering the victims, maybe, just maybe, we can get a little closer to the truth.
That's all we can really ask for, to never forget these victims and to keep searching for justice.
Well said. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode, but before we go, we wanted to give you a little taste of what's coming up next time on the LDB Crime Podcast. We're going to travel back in time to Victorian London to investigate the infamous Jack the Ripper. We'll be looking at the history, the suspects, and all the mysteries surrounding one of the most notorious serial killers of all time.
It's a case that has fascinated and terrified people for over a century, and we're going to dig deep into the evidence, the theories, and what Jack the Ripper's crimes meant for society back then. Don't miss it.
We really appreciate you listening. And if you're interested in more true crime stories, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, LDB Podcasts, True Crime. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.